Welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally. This is Coach's Corner. I'm here with Sabriya Charles and soon to be Dr. Sabriya Charles. So we're going to get into that just a little bit because she's working through her doctoral program. And so I'm so proud of you for doing that because that is no easy undertaking whatsoever. So anybody who's done it before you or after you will walk in the same footsteps as you because it's a learning curve. And more than that, Sabriya, it's going to change your world. But that's another conversation altogether. Our world today is in a mess. And I'm not talking about you and I'm talking about the world in general because it seems so much so that we're losing we're losing ourselves and not a good way to explain it. The core structure of all this is our a conversation around mental health. And so I want to kind of dive into how you see this and how you see us maybe healing. So can we get into that conversation?
Absolutely, Dr. Keith. So excited to be here. And I have come to learn in my work in the therapeutic space and in the coaching space, as I do both and dabble in both, is that self trust has been one of the biggest factors that has stood out in my work with clients. And I say that because in my opinion, I feel like we're in a world where people are losing more trust in themselves thanks to social media, comparison, thanks to expectations of society, and just really thanks to all the collective traumas I feel like we're continuing to go through that really can take away from our self esteem in general day to day.
Yeah. So with that, how what's the core? Is there a core root to all of these things that you may seem because I always say I'm 54. I'm a half a century old, and a little bit, right? And
Yes, I love
growing
it.
up, I do recognize that I was not in the era of social media. That was not, you know, heck, I had Saturday morning cartoons when I was little, so that's kind of pushing me way back. But even with all that, and I was, the MTV era, that was something, and then this whole idea of what the world has become without any, and what's the word I'm looking for? Any restraints. I guess that's one of the words I'm looking for. It's like,
Boundaries. Mhm.
yeah, restraints and boundaries is that we're just so flooded with stuff that it's hard to make sense of it one way or the other. So in your coaching and in your talks, how do you help people make sense of it all?
Yeah. So, one of the biggest things I tell people and that I tell myself constantly in my own work is that we can only live one dimension of our reality at a time.
That's
Truly.
interesting. Oh,
We can
I agree
only,
with that, but that's really interesting.
because I think so many times, when you think about social media, you're seeing almost what your life could be, right? So when you're going out in the world, you're seeing all of these versions of what you could be living. I mean, I could have been a doctor, I could have been the lawyer. I can see that in maybe somebody I went to high school with or somebody that went through college. I could have been all of those things. But if I continue to live my life feeling as though my version that I chose of life is not good enough or not the right version, then I'm stuck believing that I should be in another dimension of my reality. So I kind of get a little metaphysical sometimes with my clients and the work that I do because I think that as soon as we can make peace with the fact that we can only live one version of our lives at a time and that we have a right to change our mind, we can change complete paths.
Mhm.
But if we can accept that, then we can start to move forward. And then also we have to understand that every dimension comes with its ups and downs. So even if we were to choose a route, you're still going to find new obstacles in that new route. And so I think that if we stop trying to run from inconvenience or trying to run from things going wrong and learning to know that we can navigate, we have what it takes to navigate when things go wrong. We have what it takes to navigate inconveniences. Then I do believe that we can live a life of lesser anxiety, depression, and all of those things that we really struggle with.
Well, that's an interesting idea of that we have what it takes because everything's proving the contrary to that. And we may need to be reminded, especially the older generation to the younger generation, is let's go back to the core of what it means to be human. Let's go back to the core of what it means to be healthy. Let's go back to the core of what it means to be well. And I'm not trying to preach from the pulpit here. I'm just saying that if we take a step back And I like that you said, if we look at ourselves, I should have been this or I could have been this, but this is where I am. It sounds like people think less of themselves for having chosen what they've chosen. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think that people feel as though just because bad things or difficult things may happen in the version of life they chose, there's two things. Some people feel that they're stuck and they can only continue down that path because that's all they have. And some people also believe that they're in a situation where they're a victim of circumstance and they've made bad choices. But it's come to, I come to tell people all the time that there's a combination. Maybe we do make choices that maybe we would have done differently if we had different information or maybe we had known differently. But on the same token, sometimes you can make a choice and no matter what, there was going to be an outcome and that's going to just be the outcome because that was the outcome. And I think that we as people have to learn to understand that you can make all of the best choices in the world on paper, right? So systematically, everything can seem like the most perfect decision and you can still not get the desirable outcome. And so one thing that I like to do in my self-trust work is actually teach clients that there's really no true bad or good outcome. I mean, now don't get me wrong, there's certain things like loss of life or things that can, crimes and things that's just beyond. But in a basic scope of decision making, there are desired and undesirable consequences, right? So
Not
we
good
get
and
a little bit.
bad. It's an outcome regardless.
Yes, it's an outcome regardless. And even if you don't make a choice, it's still a choice, right? All of those are still existing. And so I think that's the biggest thing with people is just helping them one neutralize their choices and understand that no matter what you do, there's going to be outside factors that can shape your decision. And then this takes me to a whole other thing about vacuums. A lot of people make decisions in a vacuum. And I say that and I mean that as we make a decision based on no factors changing in the future or around us. But here's the thing, as we live in this dimension, the world is continuing to move around us. People are continuing to move. Things are continuing to happen. So as you make choices, it's lateral to everything that's changing and happening in the world around you. So we might have made a choice for something that we do during when COVID hit, but it was not based on when if COVID was going to hit. So then we had to change that decision. And a lot of people felt bad about themselves because their life didn't play out like they hoped based on their plans that happened with COVID.
I do appreciate that. It's like this trail that if one person exists in and of themselves, they can make any decisions they can or wants to, and it has no real impact on the rest of the world. But when you start adding people and everybody's making their individual
Yes,
decisions
that's
at
it.
specific points in time, all of those decisions eventually become a web of an interrelated world. And so there's no way of escaping that. But you mentioned something that I want you to elaborate on, and the word is trust. How can we help, or especially you, but how can we help people learn to trust themselves again and in their decision making abilities? Because that seems to be the start of the right way of thinking. I am good enough. My decisions are appropriate for when I made them. Those kind of positive things to think about. How do you help people relearn to trust themselves?
So is a multitude of factors that I go through. And so one of the things that I look at are cognitive distortions. And so cognitive distortions are simply faulty ways of thinking. For example, all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, minimalizing, where you minimize the good or minimize the bad. So there's so many cognitive distortions that we as people may partake in, and we may not realize that. So one of the first steps in helping people trust themselves is asking them to review the different types of distortions and how that thinking may impede their ability to think non-biased, right? It may impede their ability to think in a way that is thinking of the good and the bad, all that comes with something, right? And also, there's the element of the wise mind, rational mind, emotional mind. So people have the opportunity to look at, am I making decisions from an emotional place or just a rational place? How do I combine logic and emotions in my decisions? Another piece I like to add is the somatic piece. So there's actually an exercise that I do where I have participants mentally go through a forest to get themselves to their inner wisdom to the back of their minds. And we also tap into what's happening in their heart, what's happening in their throat. Oftentimes we have a decision that sits somewhere in our bodies, in our stomachs, our hearts. And so allowing them to tap into the somatic piece of where that decision may be because you'd be surprised what your body already knows before you know it. So, like, for example, you may feel your stomach churn at something before you even thought of how you feel about it, but your body already knew how you felt and how you wanted to respond. So, oftentimes, there's already a yes or no for something that comes up in our lives. It's just, how do we extract that yes or no past all the logic and the emotions? How do we get to our kind of instinctual selves? And so that's where the somatic piece comes in. So there's a lot of pieces. And then I'd also say that when it comes to self-trust, it's about being able to look at all the consequences of what we do. So I love to do those little, it's called a Cartesian square, where pretty much people have an opportunity to look at, if I do this, what can happen that will be beneficial to me or not beneficial? And if I don't do it, what can be beneficial and not beneficial? So there's a lot of different things that I use to kind of work on that muscle. But really, self-trust in itself is a muscle that you have to work and that you have to continue to hone into in order to really develop it in a way that is effective for you as a person.
So can you, I know you're going through your doctoral studies and that's a different conversation altogether, but can you use that Cartesian square and give us like an example? I would really like to dive into its practical application, and you could use me as a guinea pig if you wanted to.
Yes, Dr. Keith, this is good. So, for example, I know we're talking about a project that we want to do in the future in suicide prevention in the college campus space. I think this is a great topic. So, we can think about the benefits of doing it or not doing it. So, for example, Dr. Keith, you can say, okay, if I do this event, it can help reduce suicides on campus. It can help have more education and awareness. It can help increase the resources on campus. Versus, what are some of the cons? Well, if we do this event, it might be something that's impractical and overwhelming because it's so many moving parts. And so it might be more distressing. If we try to do the event, it could lead to more financial resources being required that might not have been able to go to something else. So things like that, right? So that's the pros and the cons of doing it.
Doing it right.
Versus not doing the event, the benefits could be students just don't have to attend an extra thing in the campus, right? Those resources don't have to be utilized. However, the cons of not doing the event means students are not getting more resources for mental health treatment, suicides can increase, and other additional risks can happen. So that's just kind of in a simple, I mean, of course, this is a very urgent matter, right? So of course, this can apply to decisions like going back to college, or it could be a decision of quitting your job. I've done that with clients. Like, should you quit this job? Should you get a different job? So though that square to me has been a really effective tool to look at a problem holistically rather than just looking at the pros and cons simply of doing it.
So now I'm curious, you've given us all these perspectives on self-trust, self-awareness, and self-health. What is your doctoral focus in?
So it's funny. I am one of those people that I'm like on my way to dissertation road, and there are like 50 billion things I want to do, right? So I think that I want
Choose one.
there's 50 billion. So I think that my focus right now really is honing in on developing an effective curriculum to teach self-trust in the psychoeducation space for therapeutic and coaching settings. I want to make sure it's transferable because people may not feel comfortable in the clinical setting. That doesn't mean that these same concepts can't be translated in the coaching setting as well. So I love that. But then on the side, I'm also really into the couples counseling work too. So got a lot of things, but I would say that's probably my main focus is developing effective treatments and programs with implementing self-trust to combat anxiety, depression, and everything in between.
And that sounds like the most appropriate thing to do with your expertise at hand. So before we end this conversation, I did ask for you to think about one thing because there's so much to our wholeness and our wellness as people. Um, Now, I look at it at a grander scale. What are we doing at the community level? Your focus is a bit more at the individual and the couple. So if you were to have, and I'm going to take me out of the picture for this time, if you were to have somebody in front of you and you were to give them something to do today to help them gain trust in themselves for tomorrow, what would that be?
Ooh, this is a good one. Thank you. I like this question, Dr. Keith. You got me good. So I was really thinking about, as you were talking, how I respond. And I think that it's really encouraging people to don't be afraid to act. Don't be afraid to make a choice, because the biggest thing is you can always repair and you can always make changes when you make that choice. And what I say by that is, long story short, I think that people feel as though just because they make a choice, they're locked into it and that's it. And there are some permanent choices we can make, right? Of course, like loss of life, according to, we do crimes and things like that. So there's always that caveat. But assuming this is a basic life choice, there is always some sort of repair we can put into place if it's not something that we wanted it to be. And so I think that people have to just understand that you have the power to even shape your life beyond your choices. So as long as you're coming in with your values and you're coming in with the best intentions and the best information you have at the time to make a decision, you have to also believe that you can see the decision through or repair the decision on the back end. That's what I always recommend to people.
I love it. There's no better way to end this conversation than with that statement. Soon to be doctor. When do you
Thank you.
graduate? When is it over? Like when do you
We
plan it to be over anyway?
we're chugging. Okay, so if I can get all the ducks in a row, it would be the end of 2025 next year. So fall 2025, like December, November-ish time. So fingers crossed.
All I can say is gather your cheerleaders because you're gonna need them all the way through. I know I did, and that's just the way it is. For everybody who's watching and listening, I appreciate you joining us. I'll see you next time. Take care.